And we're live. All right, greetings. Good to see you both. So we have Mike Lee from the East Coast in the US and Anish Mangal from New Delhi in India. And I'm Samir Verma sitting here in San Francisco. Um, so I got to tell you guys, it's 9 p.m. here. And so clearly the two of you have seen the future because you're way ahead of me, right? So don't ruin it for me, all right? uh, But yeah, so it's good to see you both, and we actually just wrapped up our Olpc welcome reception thing. Uh, we It was pretty interesting. We watched the documentary by Michael Kleiman called "The Web," the film. This is about uh, so he actually went into Peru, into one of the villages, and uh, basically lived there for 9 months, and looked at what the community does with these laptops. The kinds of challenges we've had on the ground. You guys know about this. It's like, the modem doesn't work, and the satellite connection doesn't work, and the battery doesn't work, and that kind of stuff. But it was very interesting to see that even eventually, when it all does come together, the joy on the faces of those kids, and the parents, and how they start to document their own lives. And so it's pretty interesting to see that. We did that, and then we had a little gathering and some wine and cheese, and um, we had a proclamation. We got a proclamation from Ed Lee, the mayor of San Francisco. So tomorrow, October 24th, Saturday, is one laptop per child day in San Francisco. So we got that proclamation. And Carol Ruth Silver, who's been a city supervisor, presented that to the Kleiders, Alex and June Kleider, for their contributions to the community. So that was very nice. So we did all that stuff, just wrapped up, still very much loaded with energy to see our friends and people talking about exciting stuff. So definitely we'll have other hangouts tomorrow that you guys can tune in. But right now we've got Anish and we've got Mike, so let the show begin.
Wonderful.
So Mike, what should we ask him?
Well, starting with the title, are you truly in the middle of nowhere, or have you been to the middle of nowhere recently?
I'm right now somewhere close to the middle. I'm in Delhi, but not too long ago I was deep in the Himalayas and 15,000 feet altitudes and no cell phone coverage. So it was pretty close to being middle of nowhere. Yeah. And I've been working mostly on deploying remote content servers in places like this. So yeah, go ahead,
Wow.
ask away.
Well, maybe a little more context.
Yeah.
Like maybe your most recent, you said Himalayas. That's intriguing. And were you alone? And then who were you having direct contact with? And what were you deploying?
Sure. Well, this was more of a traveling adventure than a proper school server deployment. But just to give a context, this has been sort of an ongoing thing for the last 2.5, 3 years almost, since I became involved with the School Server Community Edition project. And we forked off the original Olpc school server XS 0.7 at that point. And the idea was to make it as simple as possible for people who are looking to deploy technology, laptops, tablets, in places where there's little or no support. And this idea of a school server is really a second order problem in the sense that once you deploy a bunch of laptops and tablets, you get to realize, oh, it would have been so great to have media access and to have easier management, and then not having to call an expert every time the network breaks down. So we kind of started the school server, essentially, we forked the school server based on feedback from the field, where we try to make it simple so that the network stays stable and it configures itself. There are huge content repositories available now on the internet. How can we bridge that connectivity gap? And most of all, the focus was on flexibility. So you need not have the latest hardware. to run this thing on. It should run on any old computer that you have. And so far we have like made progress in that, and we are going to be releasing a new version maybe in a month's time. And the whole idea is to have, if you have a shiny new hardware like a Raspberry Pi or an Intel NUC or anything, it will run there. But if you have a whole old server, you just swap out the hard disk. And so I've been in India since the last year and a half almost. It's almost 2 years. And I've been going around trying to figure out what are the problems in the landscape. And I've been involved with the project in Bhagmalpur, in which Samir has been working for many years now. And more recently, since I've been traveling a lot in the mountains, I've been trying to get used to the kind of challenges there. And you have similar issues where reaching the place is not the easiest thing in the world. Indian roads coupled with mountainous terrain is not the easiest thing to navigate. Then you have the usual like no electricity or limited electricity. And although there is cell phone coverage in some parts in the mountains, but there really is not enough bandwidth. You don't have anything near 3G bandwidth. Leave aside 4G or LTE. And in many places, once the electricity goes, the mobile network goes with it. So it's very unreliable when you think of using this technology in a classroom setting. So we have to have something which runs locally on site. And so we've been working on those things. So yeah, as I said, like Samir's deployment in Bhagmalpur, then there are a couple of places in the mountains. One of them is in a place called Chokodi, which is the northern part of Indian Himalaya, and also another place close to it called Munsiari, where again it's also deep in the mountains. And then going forward, we are going to be deploying this in the northwestern part in a state called Rajasthan. This is mostly flat and desert terrain. So we'll see what happens from mountains to deserts. It's interesting times ahead.
Wow, that's pretty interesting. So you got the mountains and the deserts. But let me zoom out a little bit. So those of you who are in the Olpc sugar world would know, we have the zoom metaphor, right? We zoom out to kind of look at connectivity and such. But let me ask you this, and this is coming from my own experience. A lot of people really do not understand the concept of offline servers, because the assumption is, hey, the world is online. Why do we need an offline server, right? And it's amazing. It's like how many people have not really understood that 60% plus of the world is not online, and they're not getting online tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
So how about maybe give us a quick summary of what this offline server business is, at least for people who are not familiar with this,
Yeah, and you say 60%. I will say in India it's more than 80%, where every 4 out of 5 kids have no connectivity to the internet. And so it's kind of like when there is new technology, it changes the way you do things. And so internet is in many ways considered like path-breaking new technology. But for most of these people, the internet doesn't really exist, and it's not a binary thing. Whereas you have internet and you have no internet. So it's a whole gradation where in most of the places we work in, you will have maybe 2G internet. So you're looking at bandwidth speeds of 5 kilobytes per second. How many videos can you stream over 5 kilobytes per second? It'll probably take you a week to stream something like 3-4 TED Talks. And so when you can bridge that gap and enable those kinds of contents at the flick of a switch in instance, it's really a game changer in terms of the kind of access you're allowing. And so it changes the perspective where a kid would think that I need to invest so much time in order to search these things, and the amount of time you will save and the amount of content you can access. It's really a big perspective shift. I think also in parallel, what has happened in the last 2-3 years, there has been a big proliferation in what we call the OER movement, or open educational resources. And we are seeing huge content repositories being developed in many places. Even in India, the Indian government has been digitizing everything education related it has produced over the last 30 years and putting that online on a website. And we are putting that offline on servers. So once you start thinking along those lines, it's really a big shift. Does that answer?
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, so there is obviously there's a technology that allows, I guess, the content to go offline, which is in some ways, you have a bubble, um, and as far as your Wi-Fi will extend is, the bubble lives in that space. Um,
Yeah.
but in terms of the content itself, I know, for instance, with the project in India in Bhagalpur, we provided them with a lot of stuff, and we were really not sure what they would do with it, in terms of being able to consume that content. So if the technology is there, we can get these things done. But if we, I guess, if we step to the other side, which is the content itself, and disregard
Yeah.
how it is being served. So for instance, talking to one of the kids in India, uh, he thought this was the internet. He thought this is really the real internet, whereas we know that this was offline. So when we look at the content side of it, what are people looking at? In fact, I'd like to hear from you, Anish, but I also would like to hear from Mike, because I know you've been involved in that Lubuntu library project in East Africa, and I see pictures of these kids going to the library and reading stuff and all that, and that's the consumption side of it, right? So I'd be curious to kind of hear about what you've seen on the field. Um, so maybe Mike and then Anish.
Yeah, I think in this is Lusaka, Zambia, where it's been a while now. I guess 2.5 years ago on the USA project, and it's the capital city of that country, so the connectivity is rapidly increasing. So I think when I was there, it was marketed as 3.75G, and it's probably fully 4G now. So it's not certainly as remote as where Anish has been lately, but it's kind of agonizing to be. I mean, in that urban area, due to decades of lack of urban planning, 70% of the urban area is informal settlements, if you will, or basically, some you can just call them slums. So it's kind of almost agonizing to be in that situation where they can sort of barely afford basic smartphones. They're getting them, but overhead there's 3.75 or 4G wireless, kind of flying over your head, and it's kind of an affordability and accessibility from an economic standpoint. And so I think the sense there is, at least in an urban area, there's a little less interest in the offline servers in the consumer population, but in fact, the University of Zambia was one of the first larger pilots of Cliff Misson's internet appliance. So I think that's out of I think for a while it was University of North Carolina, but he's maybe
Right. Okay.
13 or 14 years. The name of the product escapes me at the moment, but about 14 years into it now, and started with CD-ROMs, and then it's sort of tower PCs, and I think Anish alluded to it. It was like a stark realization of within their firewall at the university. This is before, when bandwidth, and it still is very expensive. If you had a local area network, they realized, oh, well, I can hang a computer on, within the network, and then cache, open educational resources, as Anish mentioned, and create actually better than internet experience, because if you're on the university network and you have this specialized appliance, people think that's the internet. You can access anything that's on that box, it's super fast times, and then you walk off premises and you have no connectivity, or it's extremely, extremely slow. And then just in terms of Lubuntu, they are opening these children's libraries with funding from initially Dow Jones, and now the Comic Relief Foundation. The collections of 4,000 children's books in rural areas. So there are a couple locations now in sort of tribal villages, and maybe 3, 4, 5 hours outside of the city. where they either solar power is all they have, and so they've considered it, but as far as I've heard, they haven't deployed. Again, I think they're hoping to get more direct, more brute force solution to sort of get grant money and get be on the forefront of wired connectivity as that's improving. So again, they're not quite as remote as where Anish has been lately.
Right, right, interesting. Yeah, I mean, remote or not, I mean, it's still consumption of content, whether it is reference material like Wikipedia or it's short stories. In fact, I'll tell you, like, I wake up in the morning, I look at Facebook and I see one of those Lubuntu library posts. I see a kid with a book. It just warms my heart. I'm like, I'm amazed that this is still working, and there is the smallest of things make a difference, right, in terms of what the kids have access to. Anish, what kind of challenges are you seeing in, say, Rajasthan, which is all desert, as opposed to the hills?
Well, I would rather reply more generically on the content and say that the big challenge often tends to be that we have great resources in English. When you say Khan Academy, TED Talks, Wikipedia, you have huge repositories in English. But once you get down to on the ground, people really want resources in their language, and so it's both an ongoing process of okay, whatever can we find, but also interestingly, you find that there are actually lots of resources available in that language, but it's all copyrighted, and I think it's a larger cultural change which needs to happen around. People don't really know what a Creative Commons license is, and people like think that once it's free, it's public domain. So there hasn't really been an understanding in that space, in most of these spaces, where people can think about releasing their content in a CC license. And so I think that's a hindrance, and once that understanding starts to reach the ground, you will see a lot more content in local languages. But yeah, in general, finding content which is relevant has been a challenge, and I'd say the only way to go about doing this is to listen to feedback from the field. Now, we did an online course last year in August, where we had something like 1,100 teachers from different parts of the country take part. And we asked this question that, okay, you might not have the fastest internet, but whenever you do have it, what are the pieces of content that you most often use? And surprise, surprise, we had a list of something like 100 links from English language instruction to science labs and everything. And some of it was not CC, but it was still eye-opening that there is a lot of collective knowledge. So I think to get better content collections, we need more community action, generally speaking. And the other larger issue, I don't know if it's relevant to specific regions, is a lot of this content is heterogeneous in nature, where you have Wikipedia and TED Talks, which we deploy with School Server in a different file format, and KLite comes with its own collection. Maybe we can talk about that later. Like, you have these different collections, and it's hard to package everything into a single box.
Right, yeah, that's come up before in terms of the material being available in different formats. In fact, we have a session tomorrow, Saturday, in the afternoon, I think, where there are a couple of people who are going to look at this, which is, you've got content available in different formats, and is there a way to pull all of it together in a way where it can be made available? But that's the technology side of it, and I think there are some good solutions. We'll probably come up with something. But going back to your comment about Creative Commons licenses, what we've seen here, and Mike, you probably dealt with this some when you guys were working on the library project, but even on my end, like when I'm teaching at the university at San Francisco State, it's a challenge. I would love to teach a course without a textbook. In fact, last semester I did, and I'm thinking of doing it again, which is I don't want a $250 textbook. I want to use CC materials, but it's very hard to pull all of it together, right? So that's a challenge, which is get material with the same consistency across the board. But the other challenge is, I guess, in terms of the people who produce it and release it. So when you talk about the challenges on your end, do you think people in India, for instance, should actually produce their own, like in a local language, or do you think they should just adapt what's already there?
That's a tricky question. I would say, if you have the time and resources, produce your own. But in maybe 8 times out of 10, you won't have the time and the resources. So you end up adapting. I know that there's a group here working to translate Khan Academy videos, for example, into Hindi. And it's very much an adaptation. But to produce requires a lot of resources. So until that, Creative Commons understanding really pervades into the real publishers of content here, then it's going to be hard to expect, small groups to be able to produce content. So I think once you have more momentum, then you can expect more content being produced originally. And I think regionally, like locally produced content tends to be more relevant in terms of context and culture. So it's definitely a notch ahead of adaptive content, I would say that.
Mike, have you seen anything on your end with these kind of challenges?
Yeah, it was actually it's I didn't intend to have something ready, but the after a lull in action, the Labuto project team just contacted me a couple days ago, or well, actually a week ago, to have a look at some content they made in the library, and so. They certainly celebrate, and I think they have a copy of Rachel there, so that's one of the offline collections. But the funded project was actually in the direction of having the local youth attendees of the library, like a group of them, author their own content. So they're actually 3 years into that, working on exo laptops and now other types of computers at the facility. First with eToys, and then now they've done a bunch of stuff, ported some eToy stuff to HTML5. So I was just looking at that, and if you want, I could just give you a peek. But yeah, it's. Let's see. I'm gonna make a leap here and see if I can get the screen share to work. So I've got some windows open here. All right. So here is. If you're seeing a screen here with a brown bar and some links. Just in a nutshell, this is essentially a little mini website, and this is actually an index page that one of the grant participants. I mean, I want to say maybe he started as a child, and I guess in his years involved with this, David is now like young man. He's grown up with exos, and. So if you just, he made this index page, I think it's hand-coded, but then it linked. So I don't know if the sound is coming through, but this graphic that you see here is actually artwork taken from Squeak eToys, and then they kind of reattach the sounds and clickable areas with HTML. Style sheet technology, JavaScript technology, so sort of standard web standard technology, and then these are language learning lessons that they worked with a professor at the University of Zambia to originally do in eToys, and then now to support mobile devices and to be kind of hyper compatible with any current browser, as opposed to eToys, which doesn't run very well on mobile devices. They've embarked on this effort. So.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, and there's been a movement in this direction with HTML5. Like taking a lot of stuff, whether it's Flash or otherwise, and moving it into HTML5. Obviously, we've seen that with like Sugarizer that Lionel in France is working on. He's actually going to talk about that on Sunday. So it's an interesting move to see how things are moving in that direction, where it's HTML5, and then then you can wrap it as an app and have it on the website and on a mobile device, online, both offline. So definitely an interesting move in that direction. Anish, did I mute you? Anish, can you hear us?
Okay, he just got off mute.
Okay, yeah. So I just wasn't sure if he was muted or not. Okay, sorry about that.
Hi. Yeah.
Yeah. So coming back to this whole challenge. So obviously we've got the content, we've got all this these materials that people want, and then we've got the technology to try to deliver it in offline spaces. What's your sense, you guys, in terms of, content will evolve, right? We've got stuff now, it'll keep changing, we'll have more stuff, but in terms of the technology, do you think we are there yet, or are we still sort of, playing around with this stuff, and we've still got a couple of years before this is, ready to use, in terms of delivery mechanisms?
Well, if I can say, I think this will be, one of those ongoing things which keep on improving with time. But I think there is enough with the currently available technology to address a big variety of needs. If you're in an environment with no electricity, you can go with something low powered with ARM, and it's not very costly, doesn't require a lot of solar power, and you can easily create Wi-Fi networks around it. In fact, I've been experimenting with the Wi-Fi networking aspect so as to make that part of the technology as low cost as possible. So instead of like really buying off-the-shelf equipment, people can create even Wi-Fi antennas if they feel like. And I don't know, like I am holding an antenna made out of a tin can here, and it's essentially two tin cans soldered together. And this is all you really need, and this can create a link over a couple of kilometers. So in terms of technology, I think we've made big leaps, and I think it's more a question of making that technology available to the people who are doing this on the ground as a toolkit, rather than just airdropping, boxes from the sky and say, hey, switch this on and magic will happen. So I think that kind of transformation needs to take place.
Interesting. So the groups that you work with in India, do you see a buy-in? Are you?
Yeah, there is actually, I am restricting myself to places where there is buy-in, because there is a lot of pull around this. So people understand the value this brings, and yes, they ask, the questions which go, the usual questions where, can I get Hindi language content around here? Can I get, this piece of content? Or what are the challenges, if there is internet, then what are the things we need to be aware of? So there are the usual things, but people are there's a lot of excitement around this movement taking place, and it's a big leap
Wow,
in terms of culture. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good to know. One challenge, and sort of going back a few years. In fact, today we were recollecting, the early days of Olpc SF summits, and Mike, you remember when, the madness ensued and we had to pull this off. And it was like there's so much of the stuff that's driven by technology, and of course, as technologists, we get wrapped up in a lot of that stuff, and we're like, hey, that's what's driving this, and slowly but surely we often lose sight of the other end, which is the people who are supposed to use this. Are they finding it relevant? Are they finding it useful? And that kind of stuff. And that's something that's always bothered me, which is, I don't want to keep plugging it this just because it's cool stuff. It actually has to, make sense to the people on the other end. So it's good to hear that, you've got some traction and it looks like people are using this. And we'll have to see where this goes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Mike, what's new with you? What are you working on? Other than running marathons and making us all look bad.
Yeah, it's strange as this week, like, I know that you had been talking about the summit coming up, so it'll be exciting to see that tomorrow. And the guys in Zambia just came out of nowhere, so it's OLPC's found me, Um, so yeah, I mean, I haven't really been involved with. I mean, it's strange for me to say this, after so many years, but I kind of dropped out of old PC kind of stuff for, a year and a half or so.
Yeah.
Recovering from successful surgery and
Right.
dropping 75 pounds, and now I'm running marathons, which I never did before. So it's been great. And the world kind of waits, right? You can step away from,
Oh
your
yeah, yeah.
passion, and it's still, the problems are still there, the need is still there. So
Yeah. No, I think that's important. In fact, that's one of the things where you take a short break and you come back and you realize that uh, I mean, a lot of the stuff that we've been working on is so much on the forefront that it doesn't really go away in a matter of 6 months or 2 years. This is nowhere near solved, nowhere near done. The technology just gets better, it gets cheaper, access to materials get easier. I mean, last 6, 7 years, we've seen the access to the internet grow from somewhere in the 30% to close to 40%. That's a massive leap. So it's encouraging, and it's good to hear that things are moving in a certain direction where we looks like what we're doing is having an impact. One of the things we saw in the documentary today was very interesting, that uh, you see the other end of it, right? Just like we talk about Wi-Fi, we talk about, I don't know, kernel drivers and whatnot, and then you kind of see the other end of it where some kid is sitting in a village with this laptop and using email, something that we're so used to, and it's like, yeah, I mean, it's everybody doesn't have it yet, and everybody doesn't have that access, and there's a lot of work to be done. So I think it's very encouraging to hear from you guys that this is still working, and it's still a worthwhile effort, that we're still plugging away. Cool. So Anish, any things that we should look at for the coming weekend?
Sure. Yeah, I would love to see if there's a conversation around, especially on the content section, where we earlier talked about content being heterogeneous in nature, and how can we put it all under one roof, or one box, so to speak. And then if there's a conversation around that, I'd be like very pleased.
Awesome.
In particular, yeah.
Nice. Cool. How about you, Mike? You got any special requests for us?
yeah, I'll be interested. Sort of stepping back into this, I know a lot of progress has been made on the server hardware side, so it's actually very germane to the content that I just screen shared briefly, because that is it's just HTML files and JavaScript. So actually, I will be interested in taking that locally authored content and putting it on some sort of either Raspberry Pi or some low-cost appliance that I can configure here at the Washington D.C. office of the NGO. Have them when they travel over next year or over there, and deploy them remotely. So it's really exciting that I think the prices are continuing to drop on the hardware. I guess it's I don't know what the low end. I mean, if you can do it with a Raspberry Pi, that's what, $20 or $30. You wonder if it'll get any. It can get any cheaper, but I guess it will. I mean, I have a thought just in that regard. While I have the two of you here, I kind of wonder. I find that in the NGO world, people do get seduced by leapfrog efforts like Internet.org. Facebook swoop in with drone connectivity, or Google with balloons. And the funders, kind of say, well, why do I want to mess with this hardware and this this small pocket stuff? Somebody's going to come in and just give me a lot of bandwidth. Of course, they've been talking about that in my project for a couple of years, and that's not really happened. And I wonder if that kind of sideshow is going to continue to happen. I don't want to be derogatory about it, but I hope that maybe that in parallel will inspire visibility with offline servers. It's a big planet to cover, and I don't see balloons and drones honestly making a dent in connectivity very rapidly. So I don't know what your thoughts are about, Project Loon and, and drones.
Yeah. Anish, are you seeing anything on your end with internet.org type stuff?
There has been actually a lot of controversy around internet.org pertaining to net neutrality and zero rating and things like that. I think there was some kind of deployment which is happening in South India around internet.org. But I think the larger issue here is one of culture, and this is, I think, the perfect analogy where when the OLPC project began, it was almost as if, similar to these loon balloons and internet.org. You have airdrop laptops from the sky, and once things actually started working on the ground, people realized that there's much more of the community and the grassroots interaction that keeps this thing going. And I think in the case of school servers and places where there's little internet, what is really going to be valuable to these people is if we are able to create a culture around sharing and collaboration. So for that, I think it's more than just the technology used, but the approach you follow. So I think naturally with these school servers, the approach you tend to follow is there's a community and there's a movement where the server is deployed. So if we can bridge that kind of challenge, with these hi-fi projects, maybe there's some promise there.
Interesting. Yeah. I'd say there is definitely that political hijacking that happens with projects like internet.org. Again,
Yeah.
it's well-meaning. In fact, one of the guys who's part of OLPCSF, Andy Gross, works at Facebook. He's very instrumental with the visualization and the drones and all that. So I hear a lot from him. But I also realize that on the political side of it, for instance, when they went to India, there is definitely political hijacking in terms of, offering very selective access to certain kinds of services and who gets preference and all of those things. And I had a conversation with somebody about that, and I said, in some ways, what we do is similar in that, I'm deciding that you will get Wikipedia and TED, right?
Yeah.
So I made that decision for you. But in some ways, it's not the same way because I'm giving you all of Wikipedia and all of TED. I'm not being selective about. So it's in some ways, looking at subsets. Plus, I think on our end, we are not competitive about. At least we're not competing in that space about businesses, right? We're not saying, hey, I'm going to give you access to this phone company and not that phone company. Yeah. So we give you all of Wikipedia, all of TED, all of Khan Academy, all of OpenStreetMaps, and that kind of stuff. So there is that. Also on the technology and both with Loon and with internet.org, given the friends I have in that space here in San Francisco. Yeah, like Mike, like you said, I mean, there is all that storytelling, and then there is the reality of it. I mean, it's interesting stuff, but it's definitely not quite there yet, right? And some like a $35 Raspberry Pi plus a battery pack and some Wi-Fi and solar panels under $300. If I can solve that problem today, you know what? I'll solve it. And when you guys bring in your loons, go for it. I'll happily step back and you guys can take over. That's fine. Yeah. But at least in the here and now, I think under $300, it's not a bad way to go for us to do this. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So and Mike, in terms of what you had asked earlier, so the low-cost business, we've got Rangan from Australia who's going to do a hangout tomorrow in the afternoon. I'm pretty excited to hear, he's got that mysterious gadget that they're building, with pieces that fit here and there and all kinds of stuff. So we'll see what he has to say in terms of cost. And then we have another session where this guy has been working on running sugar on the Raspberry Pi, making it, a lot more accessible and some of that stuff. So yeah, we'll see. I think a big challenge in this project is to make sure that all these efforts move in a certain direction, even though they're all fairly independent. So we'll hear from all these people and we'll see where it goes. So and then hopefully this looks like this Hangout stuff works well. So it'll hold up. I hope tomorrow. So you guys can check out the stuff online.
Wonderful.
Cool. All right. Well, it's about 43, 44, 45 minutes, somewhere in that range. Nice talking to you guys. Anything else before we sign off?
I'm good.
All
I'm
right.
good. I would just say talk content as much as possible.
Cool. Well, thanks for doing this. It's always exciting to see you guys, and thanks for being supportive, and we keep plugging away.
Wonderful.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. Cool.
It was a
Thank you.
pleasure. Okay. Bye.